Welcome. It's now time for Ask the Governor, your chance to talk with the 56th Governor of Louisiana, John Bel Edwards. Over the next hour, the Governor will take your questions. The phone number into the Louisiana Radio Network studios is 1-877-217-5757. It's Ask the Governor, and now, here's your moderator, Jim Engster.
Thank you, Kevin Gallagher, and welcome to the 90th edition of Ask the Governor. Governor John Bel Edwards in the house, and he is at your service. Your numbers 877-217-5757. He's done 90 consecutive shows, and with 90 hours, according to my math, that's 3 days and 18 hours of consecutive talking from Governor John Bel Edwards. And over the course of the last 8 years, much has happened in our state. And the governor leaves office as a relatively popular person. He cannot run for re-election, and there is an election in 24 days. And the governor has expressed his support of a person who worked for him for 7 of those 8 years, Sean Wilson, the former Secretary of Transportation, who is running for the state's top office. But one thing that I think is evident in our state, as much as we talk about how much we love politics, we don't vote as much in governor's elections as we do in presidential elections. And turnout, of course, is always key in elections. How do candidates get their voters out?
You know, I'm worried about that too. And there's too much apathy among voters. First of all, we do vote more when the president's on the ballot, or the race for president is on the ballot than otherwise. But in no instance do we really vote as heavily as we should. And quite frankly, we have too few people running for office. We have too many seats for the legislature, for example, that are not contested, even in new open seats. And so I don't think we're well served by that. I don't really know why more people don't take voting more seriously. I wish they would. Not just voting, but making sure that they are informed of the various candidates and their position on the issues that matter most to them and so forth. But I really wish more people would vote. And obviously, as having run for office 4 times, it was always trying to push people to go vote. And it's so critically important, not just for the election process, but for government itself.
And you have been on the ballot 4 consecutive cycles, twice for state house, races you won in 2007 and 11, and then races for governor in 11 and 15, and now you won't be on the ballot. Do you miss the political aspect of the office of governor?
You know, I do miss running for office. It is grueling, and I will tell you, there were some, during that record heat, there were some times that I was thankful that I wasn't working church festivals and that sort of stuff. But just getting out and spending so much time in different parts of the state meeting with people was always enjoyable. But there are some advantages to not being on the ballot as well. And it allows me to spend more time, obviously, at home and with my family and that sort of thing. But I do miss it because while it's grueling, and it's a marathon, and by the time election day comes, you're just exhausted. It is a really good experience as well.
Again, 877-217-5757. You're listening to the 90th episode of Ask the Governor on your local station, and Robin Dow is producing. And let's start with LeVar in Homa. Good afternoon. You're on Ask the Governor.
Good evening, Jim, and happy late birthday, Governor. My question to you is, what is your greatest accomplishment, in your opinion, in your last 8 years as governor?
Oh, well, I think it's going to, and bear with me here, it's going to be turning around the fiscal condition of the state. It was the biggest mess ever when I became governor, a $2 billion shortfall in state general fund dollars for the first full year in 2016. And being able to turn that around while expanding Medicaid, which didn't just increase health insurance for working poor, it actually saved us money. It allowed us to make necessary investments in higher education as well as the other things that we did. And, all of those things together, but they're all related. But by the way, thank you very much for the birthday wishes. Some in the audience may not know, but Saturday was my 57th birthday, and I thank you for the birthday wish. But really, I've said it before. Expanding Medicaid was the easiest big decision ever made, but it was a big part of overcoming all of the financial problems that the state had, in addition to the other work that we did. But I appreciate you calling in, and I thank you very much for the question.
Well, you're 57 and you were 41 when you ran for the House the first time, and you were an active member of the legislature. That's why you ran. You were not pleased with the administration that you were working with, but those 16 years, you said you liked them, but if they worn you down at all?
I'm not going to say they've worn me down. I've enjoyed every day, even the really challenging days. And when I say enjoy, not that every day is fun, but it's just such a tremendous privilege to be able to represent people, whether it's in the legislature and certainly now as governor. And so I'm not going to say that they've worn me down. The Constitution doesn't allow me to run again. I'm not running again, and therefore I'm looking forward to what comes next. And I'm a young man, and I've got a lot of things that I want to do, and I'm going to go back home to Tangipahoa Parish. Resume a law practice and do some other things, and so I'm actually excited about that too. I don't feel worn down. I look in the mirror though, and I see someone who's obviously balder and grayer, but I suspect that would have happened to me regardless of what I was doing over the last 16 years.
Part of the process, and your family is growing. I'm sure you're excited about that.
I am. We're going to have our first grandchild early January, so just as it appears a few days before the inauguration of my successor, Donna and I will be grandparents for the first time, and really excited about that as well.
Well, more people are working in Louisiana. Our population hasn't grown as much as we would like, but the unemployment numbers as of yesterday look really good.
Well, they're the lowest ever. And so you say more people are working and so forth. There's no other way to put it. It's the lowest unemployment rate ever measured in the state of Louisiana, 3.3%. And we have the fewest number of people unemployed ever counted in Louisiana. And we're below the national average, which is 3.8%.
We'll be back in short order. I think we've got the intro running rather than the break, but can you pot it down, Robin? And we'll be back with Governor Edwards. The number is 877-217-5757. I think we have Senator Luno waiting in the Alexandria area, of course, to talk with you, and it'll be about the topic we just discussed right after this.
To protect her.
You're listening to Ask the Governor. I'm Jim Inkster, your moderator. Governor Edwards at your service for the next 3/4 of an hour for show number 90, 877-217-5757. Senator Luno calling in from the great hamlet of Alexandria. Good afternoon, Senator.
Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Hi, Senator Luno. Great to hear from you.
You too, Governor. Listen, I wanted to call in and let the folks know that not only is our unemployment rate the lowest in the history of the state, but when you came in as governor, it was hovering around 6%, and you lowered it down to about 3.3, which is below the national rate, which is around 3.8. So that's quite an accomplishment, and I want to congratulate you and the folks at the Louisiana Workforce Commission for that great thing.
No, thank you, and I appreciate that. And of course, it was us together, not just obviously me and you. Although as chairman of the Senate Labor Committee, you've had a lot to do with this, but the legislature as a whole. We've worked to fix the fiscal mess that we inherited. We've invested more in workforce training, higher education, community and technical colleges, and quite frankly, we've landed economic development projects and funded infrastructure, traditional infrastructure, but also now broadband and coastal restoration and protection. All of this creating jobs, and so really have turned things around. And but we did it together. But I thank you very much, Senator Luno, for your nice comments, and more importantly, for your great work over the years.
Thank you for calling, Senator, and thanks for your service. Again, 877-217-5757. That's your Ask the Governor number. James in Longview, Texas, our most dedicated caller in the past 8 years. James, you're on.
Well,
Hi, Jim, and hi, Governor. I just want to ask you about a topic that's been kind of floating in the news nationally, and that's whether or not there should be a top age limit for the office of president. But I was also wondering, do you think there should be, hypothetically, a top age limit for the office of governor? I mean, in your state or any other state?
Yeah, well, thank you very much for the call and really your commitment to this program. You're a regular listener and caller. James, I don't think I support a change to the Constitution. It would take a constitutional amendment in the country. You can't run for president in our country unless you're native born and you're 35 years old. There's no upper age limit, and I think we should just leave that to the voters. If they believe that a candidate is too old and they're not comfortable with that, they can make adjustments in the way that they vote. As for Louisiana, I feel the same way. I think, if I'm not mistaken, only judges have limits in terms of age with respect to their ability to continue to serve. I haven't agreed with that either. And in fact, on a couple of occasions while I was a legislature, I worked really hard to try to get those removed. I mean, you can be 100 years old and be a sheriff, but you can't be 75 and be a judge.
Or 71.
Yeah, right, and start a new term. I mean, so I just never have agreed with that, especially as people live longer. And I know that we have a lot of folks who well into their 70s and 80s and so forth can continue to be very good public servants. I think putting an artificial restriction on that is not wise, but just entrust the matter to the voters.
Thank you, James. 877-217-5757 for Governor John Bel Edwards. Patricia in Baton Rouge. Hello, Patricia.
Hey, thank you, and congratulations on your soon-to-be grandchild, Governor. I appreciate your change to ITEP that allowed a lot of more local say in it. And a candidate for governor, Stephen Wagasback, has said that those changes resulted in the loss of business to places like Texas and foreign countries. And I was wondering if you could make a comment on that. Thanks.
Well, I think Mr. Wagasback may have said that a good while back. I don't know, and maybe he's saying it now. I don't know. But whenever he said it, he's just been wrong, completely wrong. We made significant changes to the ITEP program because we inherited a program that was just on autopilot, and it was just unreasonable. A 100% property tax exemption for 10 years, and companies who were engaged in manufacturing were absolutely gaming the system. It wasn't necessary that they create any jobs. But every dollar being exempted is a dollar that would otherwise go to local government, for schools, for fire protection, police protection, for basic needs of the parish, like roads and bridges and so forth. We made those changes, and now it's an 80% exemption for a 5-year term with a second 5-year term possible. Jobs are a mandatory component, and then also we have locals that get to say whether or not they agree to the exemption, because it's their dollars that are being exempted. And to get to Mr. Wagasback's point, the program, the ITEP program, has doubled in size since I made the changes. The number of projects and the dollars involved in those projects has more than doubled from when I became governor. And of course, as you know, Mr. Wagasback worked for Governor Jindal for those years that before I became governor. So he's 100% wrong. And the changes we made have proven to be extremely popular across the state for local government, but for average citizens. And all of the people involved in manufacturing in Louisiana will tell you that the changes have absolutely worked, and they've been helpful. So I would hope that that's not Stephen Wagasback's position today. I know he used to say things like that. I think more recently, at least most of the candidates for governor have said they wouldn't change.
He said he would keep it as is.
The ITEP program. So I think maybe he's not where he once was. I hope that that's the case.
And the new leadership at LABI is calling for, surprise, an increase in gasoline tax, something that the leadership under Stephen Waguespack opposed. But they have a brochure, LA 23, and they say a gas tax would be beneficial. What do you make of that?
I haven't seen that from the folks at the Louisiana Association of Business and Industry. I can tell you that we have the third oldest gas tax in the country, and quite frankly, it is very difficult for us to meet our non-federal match obligations with respect to the Transportation Trust Fund that comes from the federal dollars. And that is even more the case when you look at the match that we have to put up for the additional dollars made available through the bipartisan infrastructure law. So I do believe that it will be imperative at some point to make an adjustment on the gas tax, but not purely on the gas tax. More and more vehicles are going to be electric. And so you have to find ways to because they're out there using the same roads and bridges,
Right.
and that's how we try to maintain our infrastructure. We have made some changes in the law to try to account for that. But all of this is very tricky, and obviously people never want to pay more for anything, but they all want better roads and bridges. And as we're seeing, it's just increasingly more difficult to do that. But I would be very interested in seeing what rationale, what explanation lobby may be given for having changed their position.
Well, I can't speak for them, but I suspect it would spur economic growth if we had better roads and bridges.
Yeah, it would. But we're also taking advantage of every opportunity, and we have unprecedented amounts of investment in roads and bridges and ports and airports right now all across Louisiana. As you know, we've run surpluses every year that I've been governor. We've recommended 1/3 of those surpluses go to additional funding for infrastructure through the Department of Transportation and Development. We're taking advantage of every dollar of federal funding that we can get, and being good partners with local government. For example, $300 million of the $1 billion in additional bridge funding over the 5-year program will be spent on local non-state bridges and to repair and replace. That's 5 times as many bridges as would otherwise be replaced or repaired, and by local government. And we're letting them pick which ones in their districts that they believe most need the attention. So we're doing as many of those things as possible, but over time, given the fact that we have the third oldest and one of the lowest gas taxes in the country, I think that is going to have to change.
I had a gentleman on the show I host a few days ago, Darrell Orso, who I think you briefly served with in the House.
I did. He was appointed for a short period of time to serve.
And he said he lost his seat to Rick Edmonds, because he had voted for Steve Carter's gasoline tax proposal. And I think that's why more lawmakers are not on board, because they're looking at the next election. And is that just human nature, or is sometimes you have to grin and bear it? Easier said than done, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it is easier said than done. In my first term as governor, we actually convened a task force. What should the gas tax be? They came back and they indicated it needed to be increased, and I supported that. And of course, certain people said I would never be reelected governor because of that. But here I said at the end of my second term. So people are more reasonable than sometimes they're given credit for.
Albeit the second election was a bit closer than the first.
A lot of different dynamics there.
That's true.
When's the last time we had a sitting president come 3 times to Louisiana to campaign against a sitting governor?
And a very popular sitting president in Louisiana.
Yeah, but I won. I'm sitting here as governor, and he's somewhere doing something else.
Yeah, I think he's busy. Mark in Lafayette. Good afternoon, Mark. You're on Ask the Governor.
Hey, Governor Edwards, thank you for your service. I'm a registered Republican, but I voted for you twice. But don't tell anybody else.
I think you just did, but okay, Mark.
It's an anonymous line. So regarding your stance on the death penalty, I don't even know if I agreed with it, but I admire your courage, your faith, and seem like guided by conscience. I'm curious what brought you to that decision.
Well, the more I learned about how the death penalty is administered in Louisiana and the extreme cost associated with it in dollars, and the fact that, well, let me just run through it real quickly. So in 20 years, we've executed one person. In that same time period, 6 have been exonerated and freed from prison because they were not guilty of the crime of which they'd been convicted. That sort of answers it, because the death penalty, when administered, it is final, and you don't get a do-over. You can't get a mistake back. Secondly, over 50 have had their sentences changed to something other than death, meaning there were mitigating factors, other things that weren't taken into account fully or appropriately in court, and so forth. It costs, over the 20 years, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars for the prosecutions, for the defense, and for the death row, the additional cost of having a death row. But for me, I think the biggest deal is I believe that pro-life means you're pro-life. And the death penalty is the exact opposite of that, because what it says is that as a state, that we have people all over the state in public office and otherwise who say that we're one of the most, if not the most, pro-life state in the nation. That is incompatible with the death penalty when the state is saying, as a matter of policy, it is okay to resort to violence and death to settle a score. That's not the example we should be setting for anyone, much less our children.
We're halfway through the hour, which means we've got another half hour to go. If you'd like to talk with Governor John Bel Edwards, this is an opportunity to give us a call at 877-217-5757. Matt White of Hometown Productions also in the studio, so those of you watching statewide, we appreciate your attention as well. Back after this. This is Jim Inkster. I am your moderator and pleased to be with the governor for the 90th consecutive month. The governor being John Bel Edwards. We'll have 3 more of these programs remaining in our 8th year of doing this, and then the governor in January leaves office, and on the 8th day of January, he will move on to a meet, I presume, to his home. Is that, yeah? And
my home is actually in Roseland, but, it's right there.
Right there, suburban a meet, right? Yes. And there will be a new person in the mansion. One person we know who won't be there is Richard Nelson, who's an exceptional young person, 37 years old, a lawyer and an engineer, who gave it his best shot, ran for governor for about a year, and he dropped out today. Governor, I know you know that when you put your name out there and put yourself in the arena, it is a perilous proposition sometimes.
Well, it is, especially with the advent of social media. And really, people will say things on social media that is unfiltered, things that they, for the most part, would never say out of their mouth.
And do it anonymously,
in
too.
person. They can do it anonymously and so forth. So I appreciate anybody who puts himself out there, and Richard Nelson is a really smart, articulate person, not someone with whom I agree with all the time, obviously, and he would say the same thing about me in terms of agreeing, but really a young man, and I do hope that he would continue to look to ways to engage in public service. But I did learn just before the show started that he had withdrawn earlier today.
And Attorney General Jeff Landry has filed a lawsuit to block you from making some changes that you talked about earlier regarding the Board of Pardons. I don't know that this is any great surprise, but your thoughts about the petition?
Yeah, I haven't made any changes at the Board of Pardons or asked them to change their rules. As you notice, as we discussed, a number of death row inmates have filed petitions to pursue commutations of their sentence to life without parole. None of them are seeking to get out. There's nothing in the rules that govern the conduct of the Board of Pardons that says they can't hear those petitions, those applications. So I'm not sure what grounds the Attorney General is pointing to. I know that the letter he sent to the Pardon Board just couldn't have been more wrong. Now, I'm I'm optimistic because he's not going to find a judge who is as ignorant of the law as he is, and he's not going to find one who is more politically motivated than he is either.
Now, on another matter involving prison reform, I see some of these candidates attacking people who have been in the legislature who voted for the prison reform package, saying they're soft on crime and criminals are going crazy in our state. Do they have a point, or is this just political pap?
No, and by the way, it's what has happened reflexively in Louisiana for decades, which is why we have had simultaneously the highest rates of imprisonment and some of the highest crime rates. Our efforts were almost entirely focused on nonviolent, non-sex offenders, and which we were locking up at 2 to 3 times the rate of other southern states and keeping them there longer. We weren't safer as a result, and so we enacted very common sense bipartisan reforms to address that. And the stated reason was also to make room available for violent offenders. And the number of violent offenders in our prisons today in Louisiana actually is more. It's a larger number than it was in 2017 when we enacted the reforms. And so the reforms are working. And the increase in crime that we experienced in Louisiana was experienced all over the country in states that had not done any criminal justice reform. And I think the data is very conclusive that the increase in crime here was a smaller increase than in many other states. But you have politicians who demagogue this issue, and they try to paint anyone who is for common sense reforms on criminal justice matters as soft on crime. I think it's entirely false. It's not borne out by the data. It is just a political talking point. And I'm not going to tell you that it's ineffective, but it is what has led our state to have the highest incarceration rate, which, by the way, I found out last week, I think we may be number 2 right now.
Well, I do recall in your first election, your opponent, Senator Vitter, I think the word he used was thugs. We're going to be letting thugs out of jail. And then ultimately, if I remember right, he became a lobbyist to help you pass it.
He became a lobbyist and worked on behalf of the criminal justice reform initiatives that passed in 2017. He absolutely did. The other thing that's sort of ironic, if you remember when the president was Trump, was considering a very similar set of initiatives at the federal level, the First Step Act. He asked me to come visit with him in New Jersey at his golf course to learn from me what we had done in Louisiana, how we had achieved bipartisan consensus to do it, why we did it, and those sorts of things. And then he pursued some very similar reforms. And so I just find that a little bit ironic, too.
I knew you had met. Was it at his golf course?
It was at his golf course because at that time he had moved out of the White House so they could do some renovations, some work. And so he was both living and working out of his New Jersey golf course.
Did you play golf with him?
Oh, no. No, I did not play golf.
Jefferson in New Orleans. Jefferson, you're on the air with Governor Edwards.
Hey, Governor Edwards. I've been, pleasantly surprised to have you as my governor for 8 years now in a very red state. And I know that your, politics on abortion might not translate well nationally. I think that's probably a necessity of where you're coming from. But is there any Hail Mary chance of you getting on the 2024 presidential ticket?
All right. What about possibility? Thank
Jefferson,
you, Jefferson.
First of all, thank you for the call. No, there's no chance of that. It's just not something that's in the cards. And as I've mentioned, I'm going to work every day as governor, and then when I leave, I'm going home back to the private sector. Going to continue to work as a lawyer, do other things, and be a grandpa. So that's what my future is. But I do appreciate your nice comments, and I will tell you, every day as governor has just been a tremendous privilege for me and for my family. It's not always been easy, but we feel very thankful for having been given the opportunity to serve the people of Louisiana, who, quite frankly, continue to inspire me with their goodness and decency and the resilience that we've seen time and time again.
Cliff in Baton Rouge. Cliff, you're on the air with Governor John Bel Edwards.
Hi, Governor. Thank you for your service. Actually, because of you, I've actually moved back to Baton Rouge from Atlanta over the past few years, and my family has been impressed. But I wanted to ask, in Atlanta, it's a tech mecca. It's becoming a tech mecca. What else can we do to increase more tech companies moving into Baton Rouge like IBM?
First of all, I went to IBM the other day. They celebrated 10 years here in Baton Rouge with their Client Innovation Center and the work that they're doing. Very impressed. By the way, they have exceeded their job requirements for the incentives. They're now at 110% of what was required at this point in time. So very happy with that. And thank you for your call. By the way, I guess you're off the air now. I was going to ask if you're a Dirty Bird fan or a Saints fan, and if you said you were for the Falcons, I wasn't going to answer your question, but I can't ask that question now. So we have to invest in higher education, make sure that we're producing the talent necessary, because if you can meet people's workforce demands, they really love being in Louisiana. There's not a better place in the state in terms of history, culture, food, art, you name it. And those are things that attract, especially young people who are really in these STEM fields involving the tech world and cybersecurity and so forth. And so that's where we're focused. And we have the state's first cybersecurity degree was actually offered at Grambling State University. We've got a cyber engineering program at Louisiana Tech. The investments we're making at LSU have been extremely good. In fact, LSU received its official designation as a National Center of Academic Excellence at the NSA Gov's Cybersecurity Education Colloquium. That just happened. So LSU receiving that sort of recognition and award on a national level. So that's what we have to do. We are doing it in tech and elsewhere. And you mentioned IBM, so I was just so impressed with the quality of the employees there and their commitment to our community.
Another quarter hour remaining with Governor John Bel Edwards in show number 90 of Ask the Governor. 877-217-5757 is your number. Robin Dow is producing, and we will return with the final quarter hour after this brief timeout on your local station. You're listening to Ask the Governor, and your number is 877-217-5757. If you're so inclined to give Governor John Bel Edwards a call on show number 90. There was a story this week that is certainly interesting. $1 billion is a lot of money, even in today's world, and especially for a university. Universities, even LSU and the UL system, don't get that much in a given year, but the federal government in a report says the state, over a 30-year period involving several administrations, has underpaid Southern University, if you will, $1.1 billion, I believe. So, Governor, what do you make of this early read?
Yeah, well, we're still trying to figure it out. The letter just came a couple of days ago. I have asked the Commissioner of Administration, Jay Darden, and the Commissioner of Higher Education, Kim Hunter-Reid, to meet with the federal officials. And this was a letter sent jointly by the Secretary of Education and the Secretary of Agriculture. And they're saying there's a $1.1 million underinvestment in Southern relative to LSU over a 30-year period, and point to a federal statute that I think that dates back to 1890. When land-grant universities came into existence. If a state accepted land-grant assistance from the federal government, then there were certain legal requirements. And so we're trying to figure out whether that was aspirational, whether it was mandatory, and so forth. Now, I have no doubt that if you go back over the decades, we have underinvested in Southern. What I can tell you is that since I've been governor, if you take Southern and its Ag Center, LSU and its Ag Center, we've increased funding across the board, but the increases at Southern have actually been higher on a percentage level since I've been governor than those at LSU. I'm not saying we've done all that we should or that we shouldn't do more, but we are looking into this. And one of the things I can tell you is the money we're giving Southern's Ag Center, for the example, is well above what is required to meet the non-federal match requirement and draw down all of the federal dollars available for the Southern Ag Center. And that changed while I was governor. That wasn't the case before. But we're going to look into it. And as Jay Darden said, we're going to see whether we agree and what that underinvestment amount really is, and try to make sure, is this something that is being reflected in our higher ed funding formula? Do we need to make an adjustment there? And then we'll, of course, give a full report to during the transition to whoever the next governor is going to be and their team based on what we find out there.
Today, a story written by our friend Mark Ballard and the Advocate in Picayune. Money for disaster relief is tied up in the ongoing fight among U.S. House Republicans over how best to fund the federal government. It's a conflict that could lead to a government shutdown in 10 days, and of course that would affect Louisiana and projects here. Your thoughts about this potential collision?
Yeah, well, first of all, anytime you have approvals from the federal government, from FEMA, to do work at their expense, and it comes with a non-federal match obligation, and that work starts, you hate to see those funds suspended. That's what has happened. So these are projects to mitigate against the future damages because of natural disasters. And there are several of them all over the state. What FEMA realized was we've had a number of disasters, including the hurricane in Florida, but also wildfires and other things in Hawaii and so forth. And they don't have enough money in their emergency response fund to both respond to those disasters and to maintain their commitments. And so unless and until Congress appropriates more money into that fund, which hopefully will happen this month, because they got to fund government to some extent to keep government open after October 1st. And so hopefully that's going to happen. I know that's one of the big bones of contention is whether there will be disaster funding and Ukraine funding in the continuing resolution that Congress should take up this month. Obviously, we just need them to get the work done. I mean, we need to have a robust emergency response fund at FEMA, and the federal government should live up to the commitments that they make.
And the congressional redistricting, which you have advocated in Louisiana, has not gone the way of your opponents in the courts, but yet it is being tied up by delays, and the election now is a year away. So what will happen between now and the 2024 congressional cycle?
Well, my best guess is that while the folks who want to maintain the status quo, which I believe is wrong, it's wrong as a matter of just basic right and wrong, but it's also wrong as it relates to the Voting Rights Act. They're going to lose. But at this point, it seems to me they're just trying to run the clock and see whether they can just get one more election cycle by delaying this with litigation that is much like they're doing in Alabama, that is completely without merit. And it's my hope, quite frankly, it's my expectation the courts are not going to allow that to happen, because this was the United States Supreme Court that spoke in the Alabama case. And they had stayed the Louisiana litigation pending the outcome of that case. And I can just tell you the case in Louisiana is stronger than it is in Alabama. So I don't think the U.S. Fifth Circuit or the Middle District of Louisiana in both have certain aspects of that litigation currently. I just don't believe that they're going to allow for this to drag on so long that we don't have a new second majority black congressional district in time for the elections next year.
Roger in New Orleans. Roger, you're on the air with Governor Edwards.
Hey, Governor. Sorry to see you go, but I understand that has to happen. I'm going to support Sean Wilson in the race. I'm a little concerned about the insurance. I just want your thoughts. The insurance commissioner, I was sad to see the way that's turning out. Sounds like the new commissioner is going to make it a little bit easier for insurance companies to come in, but by charging us more. I have some rental property that my insurance just went up to $13,000 a year.
Yeah, Roger, thank you for calling. This is a tremendous crisis here. And in other states like Florida and California, and I think more and more states over time. And simply put, we have very severe weather events that are happening more frequently, and they're more severe. And ultimately, that has to be reflected in the premiums, and so that's what's going on. And there are certain things we can do to mitigate against that. One is having the healthiest, most competitive insurance market that we can possibly have. I know that that's what the incoming commissioner of insurance, I should say, Tim Temple, is looking to do. We just have to maintain a balance because, quite frankly, the insurance companies that have been doing business in Louisiana have not acquitted themselves very well of paying damage claims that they're legally obligated to pay in the amount that they're obligated to pay and in the time limits. And so I think we have to be careful about not holding their feet to the fire. But at the same time, we do need to depopulate citizens. We need to try to reduce the cost of insurance. We need to try to bring in more insurers. The incentive fund that we appropriated was for that end. And then finally, we have to make sure that we have less damage from these storms, and that's the Fortify Roof program, where we have grant money for people to repair, I should say, replace roofs to the higher standard, and we have better building codes now, so that new construction will have this higher standard. But there is no magic wand. This is a very, very difficult issue, and I have all the respect in the world for Tim Temple for running, because this is one of the most difficult jobs in all of state government. And I really like Tim. I do have some questions about some of his proposals, but I guess that's just the way the world turns.
Final caller for the governor, Dwayne in Slidell. Please be concise, Dwayne.
Governor, it's a pleasure. Appreciate your service. I hate to go backwards. You were talking about taxes on gasoline. If EV growth, electric vehicles, start surpassing gasoline-powered vehicles, what are we going to do then about monies for roads and bridges?
Yeah, no, thank you, Dwayne. So you have to register your vehicle. And so what we've done is we've passed a law that the registration of an electric vehicle will be more than a non-electric vehicle, and the difference will go to the State Transportation Trust Fund. And that is supposed to approximate the amount of gas taxes that would have been paid by the owner of that vehicle in its ordinary use. The question is whether we got that amount right or wrong. Chances are it was too low. And I'm having a senior moment, even though I'm only 57. I can't remember whether it was $200 or $300 more to register and to keep registration on a electric vehicle. But that's the approach we've taken. Other states are doing other things, but ultimately, as vehicles have become more fuel efficient, it has been a real strain on our Transportation Trust Fund from the state level. And now, as we're adding more and more electric vehicles, that will continue to be the case if we don't get that funding mix right. Now, some people say we're disincentivizing electric vehicles when we're trying to advance new and greener technologies to address climate change. We're not trying to disincentivize people from getting these electric vehicles, but we have to maintain our roads and bridges.
Thank you, Governor. And next month, when the governor appears, we will know who is in a runoff for governor, and will be in the hunt on November 18th to succeed him on January 8th.
And so people get out there and go vote,
yeah, please vote. Whoever you support, please make your voice known in a tangible way.
Thank you for listening to Ask the Governor.